Hello, beautiful soul. Welcome back to Everything Within podcast. I'm your host, Alina Krasnožon. This podcast is all about empowering you to build an extraordinary, fulfilling life and tap into the limitless potential that resides within you. Thank you for tuning in today. This week, I wanted to talk about freedom, but not as an abstract concept or a marketing buzzword, but as that elusive thing we chase our entire lives while rarely questioning what it actually means. Freedom has become this sanitized ideal plastered across social media and self-help books. But the messy reality of it, that's the conversation nobody seems to be having. From as far back as I can remember, I've been chasing freedom in every aspect of my life. That deep, visceral desire to break away from constraints, to breathe, to exist on my own terms. But at every turn, family dinners, school hallways, job interviews, I found myself being squeezed into boxes and molded into someone else's idea of who I should be. Someone who follows orders, stays in line, and never questions the path laid out before her. Does that resonate with any of you? That feeling of suffocation when you realize the life you're living isn't actually yours? Everyone wants freedom, but few are prepared to pay its price. And make no mistake, there is always a price. Freedom isn't just about escaping something. It's about embracing everything that comes once you escape, including the responsibility, the uncertainty, and sometimes the isolation. In today's episode, we're going to explore this territory together. We'll talk about personal responsibility and how it intersects with systematic realities. We will unpack the loneliness that can come with choosing your own path. We will look at building self-discipline when there is no one telling you what to do, and how freedom ultimately connects to your sense of self-worth. So if you've ever felt torn between the security of conformity and the call of your authentic self, I hope that you will find a lot of value in today's episode. Let's begin. This relentless focus on personal responsibility is everywhere these days. If your life isn't what you want, it's because you're not trying hard enough. You're the CEO of your life. Your mindset is the only thing holding you back. Sounds familiar? The self-development industry has perfected the art of commodifying our deepest human desire for growth. It's a 13 billion industry in the US alone, and over 45 billion industry worldwide that thrives on making us believe that everything that goes wrong in our lives is completely our fault. Buy this course, read this book, work with this coach, follow this morning routine, and all your problems will vanish. It's seductive, and parts of it are true, but there is still something that is left unsaid. We live in a broken system. We're born into certain cultures, families, economic conditions that shape our beliefs, our view of the world, that create biases we spend our entire lives protecting and judging everybody according to them. And we don't choose the place, the family, and culture we're born into. And when you start questioning these foundational beliefs, it feels like your entire world crumbles. You don't know who you are anymore. You feel lost, and it hurts. It takes time to adopt a new vision of yourself and the world, beliefs that will actually lead you toward the life you want. But the self-help industry often creates this unrealistic picture of transformation, promising quick, painless fixes. When you're new to self-development, you might buy into this. I know I did. But after trying dozens of life-changing techniques that changed nothing, you realize it doesn't really work that way. But I guess that we all need to go through that phase. Gain experience, make mistakes, and don't give up just because you didn't become a whole new person after you worked with that coach or finished that life-changing program. I think we all go through this phase when we step off the conventional path, the disorientation, the feeling that everyone else has it figured out except you. Here is the delicate balance I've had to learn. Yes, taking radical responsibility for your life is essential for change. But at the same time, you need to acknowledge your limitations and the imperfections of the system we live in. You might not have had the support, the unconditional love, the other people you compare yourself to had. Give yourself more credit. We live in a society that shapes us in a certain way as well, that ties our worth to productivity, work, and achievements, that dismisses creativity and self-expression. If you spend your whole life being a good girl, being obedient, and shutting your mouth, it might take time to reconnect with parts of yourself that were silenced. I know I still struggle to reconnect to that part of myself. I don't know that part of myself, but I really want to take time to get to know it and embrace it. Questioning everything is a good start. Why should success look like this specific image we're sold? Why family, kids, marriage considered the most important things in a woman's life? Why are certain types of jobs considered better than others? Because they make more money for billionaires? Why do the things that trigger you? What's the root cause? Why aren't we taught emotional or financial intelligence in school? Why are we just forced to memorize things, to pass exams with zero applications in life? Sometimes questioning the things that seem most obvious is the key to changing your life. And when you start questioning them, nothing seems so obvious anymore. For me personally, entrepreneurship became the biggest personal development and spiritual journey I've ever embarked on. It made me question everything I considered to be true and normal. My beliefs, my insecurities, my triggers, so much came up, and I was not prepared to handle all this when I started. No wonder I struggled to take action in the beginning. Everything I believed to be true about reality and myself turned out to be not as true as I thought, not set in stone. It was incredibly hard to let go of the beliefs about success that had been instilled in me by the society and culture I grew up in. I had no idea the amount of emotional labor it would take. My old world started to crumble in front of my eyes, and without all these beliefs and preconceived notions, I didn't know who I was anymore. I felt lost, felt not normal, felt like a weirdo, and felt isolated. I started this whole journey because I wanted more freedom. I was suffocating in my old life, but I had no idea the price I would need to pay. I felt bitter sometimes because I was never handed anything in my life. I didn't have the resources and support to move faster, so it was a very bad idea to compare my journey to somebody who had that support. It just couldn't be the same. And I needed to make peace with that part of myself and keep moving forward without blame, without bitterness, without looking back at what everybody else was doing around me. So yes, maybe you will have more challenges than some people, but you're still capable and worthy of creating the life you want. This happens through consistent work, through trying new things and learning new skills, through developing self-love and self-compassion, through healing old wounds and traumas, through learning and allowing yourself to take up more space and be more confident. It will come, even if it doesn't come as quickly as we would like sometimes. The shift and changes are happening right now, in this moment, when you choose consistently to show up for yourself. While personal responsibility is powerful, it became the perfect tool for a system that wants to shift all burden onto individuals. The truth lies somewhere in the middle, in acknowledging both your power and the reality of the world we live in. When you embark on the journey toward freedom, you will eventually start breaking free from cultural programming. This is huge. Even after years of inner work, I still struggle with it because these beliefs are ingrained so deeply within us, woven into the very fabric of our being. Everything I was taught by the culture I grew up in about money, relationships, family, success, career. For the longest time, these weren't just ideas I had, they were who I was. I was taught that there is just one acceptable path in life. Go to university, get a master's degree at any cost, and get a real normal job, period. End of story. I was taught that resources and money are limited. I was raised in scarcity and fear, so for a very long time I lived in constant fear about survival. Even though there were no objective reasons to feel unsafe, my body felt unsafe, and sometimes I felt like I was physically dying. I was taught to believe that expressing myself wasn't safe because everybody had their opinion and judgment about it. I couldn't resist family and societal expectations. I didn't have the necessary strength to handle that pressure just yet. But all of this felt very alien to me since my teenage years. There was always this voice inside of me asking why. Why does it have to be this way? Deconstructing this societal conditioning is a crucial step because it reveals what's actually yours and what was imposed. Often, we put unnecessary pressure on ourselves to achieve certain things, to buy certain things that are markers of success, to maintain the image of the beautiful life. But maybe these are things you never really cared about. Maybe having kids was something you never really wanted. Maybe the way you think you should raise your kids dictated by the culture you grew up in. Maybe the pressure we put on ourselves to be the perfect spouse, parent, daughter, or employee is based on someone else's standards. In reality, there is no one right way of living a life. It's possible to find your own balance and your own way to live your life and show up in the world. Feeling not normal is often the first sign you're awakening to your authentic self. It certainly was for me. I never really fit in anywhere and always felt weird about it. I didn't want to have a conventional job. I didn't want to live in a country of my origin. I never had a desire to have kids, but I kept forcing myself to want all these things because they were expected of me. And everyone around me seemed to be doing the same thing. But what is normal anyway? Is there really some universal standard for living a good life? Are we all the same and meant to want the same things? That's what the system would have us believe, that we should all be normal like everybody else. And why? Because it's easier to manipulate people who are striving for the same predefined goals. It's easier to keep people doing things they're not particularly passionate about. When they believe that's just how life works, it's easier to control people who live in a fear of standing out. One of the hardest parts of this journey is distinguishing between your authentic desires and programmed needs. This isn't as easy as we might think. Most of my dreams and desires were programmed by society and took me years to figure that out. I had to come back to myself, work through my old traumas, triggers, and programming. I had to try different jobs and ways of living to finally start distinguishing my authentic desires and how I want my life to look like. When you feel unsatisfied with your life, when you're repressing parts of yourself to please others, that's a sign you need to look deeper within to find a more aligned path for yourself. Navigating the discomfort of questioning long-held beliefs, that's where many people get stuck. Let me be honest, creating and living a life of freedom will always be uncomfortable. You will need to have hard conversations with yourself. You will need to be ready to sit in that discomfort when you start this work. This is exactly the way it's supposed to be and supposed to feel. But here is something important. Do this gradually. Don't drown in self-blame, self-judgment, or guilt because you have certain desires or beliefs. You need to feel your emotions, all of them. Don't escape from them. Don't judge them. Acknowledge them. Sit with them and be gentle with yourself throughout this process. I believe the most radical act isn't rebellion, it's honest self-examination. Because when you truly look at yourself, at your conditioning, at what drives your choices, that's when the real transformation begins. That's when you start to reclaim your freedom in everything you do. When you choose the path to freedom, the loneliness will be there always by your side. When you start creating your own path to freedom, prepare yourself for this truth. Your family, your spouse, your old friends and colleagues most likely won't understand what you're doing. They might question you, worry about you, or even try to pull you back to the familiar. But ask yourself, how badly do you want this freedom? For me, freedom is one of my core values. I'm ready to do whatever it takes to have it. I have one life and I can't let other people, even those closest to me, dictate how I live it. This path often requires letting go of old connections. It means staying with yourself long enough to really get to know yourself, to get grounded within yourself, to learn to validate and encourage yourself. It means putting yourself first, even if that means losing people in your life who don't understand what you're trying to do. It's completely normal to feel lonely during this transition. You're in between your old life and your new one, and you don't have yet found people who understand you or who are trying to do the same thing. You are in this liminal space, not quite where you were, not where you're going. You need to get comfortable being alone with yourself. This isn't about becoming a hermit. It's about building such a strong relationship with yourself that you're not dependent on constant external validation. What's fascinating is how society subtly discourages this kind of individuality. Our modern capitalist system seems to want two contradictory things from us. On one hand, it separates us and creates a highly individualistic society, isolating us and erasing the notion of community. When you're isolated, you're easier to manipulate and break. But on the other hand, it simultaneously tries to create sameness in our goals, in the way we dress, in our dreams and desires. It wants to create obedient squares, not unique individuals with their own authentic aspirations. It wants us to be individual enough to compare with each other and consume differently, but not so individual that we question the system itself. But we're not the same, so why should we want the same things? It just doesn't make sense. This society values money and productivity over everything else, not individual self-expression, not embracing your unique weirdness, not raw creativity that doesn't immediately translate to profit. Despite the necessary solitude of the journey, finding your tribe while maintaining your independence is crucial. You need people who are trying to do or have done exactly what you want to do. I'll be honest, I still struggle with this. I haven't quite found a community of like-minded people I really connect with on a deep level. In the past, I relied too much on gurus and coaches. I thought working with them would solve everything and bring me success. But I completely dismissed my own desires and what I truly wanted. I was afraid to stand on my own. Then I kind of lost hope in coaches and the self-help industry because I felt like they wanted to mold me into somebody I was not. They made me do things in ways that didn't feel authentic to me. I felt something was off, but I didn't realize what it was until recently. Now I think more critically and independently in everything I do. I check in with myself first and then consider what others are saying I should do. That's why finding people who are mentally close to you, who have similar goals, values, and maybe life experiences is so powerful. In these relationships, you're equals. There isn't someone positioned above you telling you what to do. As for strategies for dealing with isolation without compromising your vision, this is actually one of my big goals for this year, finding a community of like-minded people when we can support each other. For several years, I spent time in total isolation, and now I feel ready to go out there and connect. I feel much more confident in my skills, in what I do. I know why I do what I do. I have my own vision, and having people who are trying to build something similar can be a huge booster. Some strategies I'm implementing include joining smaller, more focused communities rather than massive generic ones. I'm also being much more selective about who I let into my inner circle, looking for people who energize, who challenge me in a constructive way, who are doing their own inner work. Online communities can be powerful, but don't underestimate the value of in-person connections when possible. There is something about sharing physical space with people on similar journey that cannot be replicated digitally. Create your own micro-community if you can't find one. Start a small group, even with just 2 or 3 people who share your values. Remember that meaningful connection doesn't happen overnight. It takes vulnerability, consistency, and patience. But the right connections, ones that honor both your independence and your need for community, are worth the wait and the work. The solitary path doesn't have to remain solitary forever. It's often just the necessary first phase of a much longer journey, but it's a phase you need definitely to go through. When we talk about freedom, we eventually have to talk about self-discipline, but probably not in the way you're thinking. Let's redefine what this actually means when you're creating your own path to freedom. We're all gotten used to external forces pushing us. Our boss, our parents, when we were younger, schools and universities that imposed structures and deadlines on us. So when we come out of these systems, it becomes incredibly hard to motivate ourselves internally because we were never really taught how to do it. For the biggest part of my life, the external motivation and discipline were the only things that kept me going. When I left a traditional job, I was motivated purely by fear and scarcity, a direct result of the scarcity mentality I grew up with. I ended up pushing myself too hard, getting upset when I didn't see results fast enough. All my life, my self-worth was defined by my grades, my job. It was connected to external metrics, so it was hard to find balance, to learn patience, to give myself instant internal validation. I kept thinking discipline was about pushing harder, when that was actually the worst way to motivate myself. Because of this approach, I was stuck in a constant loop of starting and abandoning things. When you're used to living in a constant state of stress, it becomes extremely difficult to motivate yourself in a healthy way. Your nervous system is dysregulated, and you keep blaming yourself for not trying hard enough. But it's completely normal. First, you need to regulate your nervous system before you can feel safe enough to take more action, to take up more space, to feel worthy of using your voice. So if you feel stuck, maybe the answer isn't to push harder, but to stop, to pause, to breathe, to check in with yourself, to feel your emotions, to acknowledge the discomfort and sit with it. Some signs of dysregulated nervous system include feeling constantly on edge, having trouble sleeping, experiencing digestive issues, feeling emotionally reactive, or alternating between high energy and complete exhaustion. Your body is telling you something important when these symptoms show up. To regulate your nervous system, try practices like deep breathing. Even just 5 minutes daily can make a difference. Gentle movement like walking or stretching, spending time in nature, limiting stimulation, and creating quiet space in your day. These are essential for creating the foundation that true discipline is built on. Get clear on what you're trying to build and why it's important to you. This is where knowing yourself and your values becomes crucial. Self-awareness is the first step towards sustainable discipline. Knowing when you're pushing yourself too hard and when you need to pause is vital. This awareness allows you to build discipline that lasts, that doesn't feel like a burden or constant violence against yourself. I was forced to do things throughout my entire life that I didn't really want to do, but I felt obliged because it was expected of me. I internalized this cruel form of self-discipline. But as you grow, you get to decide how discipline can look for you, what habits you want to adopt that will help you to move in the direction you want. You need to be flexible and open enough to redefine what self-discipline means to you. This is a key part of freedom, the ability to create structures that serve you rather than confine you. Finding balance between structure and flexibility is an ongoing practice. Having a structure and a plan is important, but I personally get very uncomfortable with phrases like "fuck your emotions and stick to the plan." While sometimes persistence is important, you need to honor your emotions. Your emotions often point towards something inside yourself that needs your attention, whether it's unprocessed trauma, triggers, or old beliefs and conditioning that are holding you back. You can't simply ignore them and move forward. Being able to stop and check in with yourself, to be flexible, that's real strength. You need to be honest with yourself about what you can handle right now. And sometimes having absolute freedom can feel overwhelming, especially when you've never really felt free enough in your life. Start small, create tiny structures that feel supportive. Maybe it's a morning routine that energizes you, or a way of planning your week that leaves room for rest and inspiration. Your discipline should feel like it's supporting your freedom, not working against it. True discipline isn't about force, it's about understanding yourself deeply enough to create systems that work with your nature, your life rhythm, your personality. That's where real freedom begins to take root in your everyday life. Now let's explore the relationship between freedom and self-worth. These two are so intertwined, yet we rarely talk about how they affect each other. When you start having more freedom in your life, it can feel surprisingly unsettling. You might feel lost, overwhelmed, even anxious. Why? Because freedom challenges your entire sense of identity. You're creating a new self with new habits, but your old patterns and conditioning keep showing up and holding you back. This is completely normal, and it takes time to navigate. Think about it. If you've spent decades defining yourself by your job title, your relationship status, or your role in your family, what happens when you step away from those definitions? Who are you without them? This void can be terrifying. The structures that once confined you also gave you a sense of place in the world. Freedom also challenges you to make choices based on your own desires rather than expectations. For many of us, this is unfamiliar territory. We've been taught to choose the right path, the path that is not necessarily what calls to our heart. Another challenge is the sheer responsibility of freedom, when you can't blame your boss, the economy, the upbringing, or any external factor for your circumstances. That's both liberating and terrifying. You now stand naked before your own choices. This brings us to the massive relationship between external validation and independence. Walking the path to freedom requires you to learn how to validate yourself constantly from within, regardless of the results you get or don't get, regardless of what everyone else around you is doing. You need to learn to think independently, to have faith in yourself, in your vision. Don't let yourself be defined by failures. They're just data points, not definition of your worth. This is something I still struggle with sometimes, as I lived my whole life by external validation. My grades, my performance reviews, likes on social medias, compliments on my appearance. These were the metrics I used to determine if I was enough. When you step away from traditional path, those external validation points often disappear. No one's giving you a performance review for following your heart. There is no standardized test for authenticity. You have to learn to be your own compass, your own cheerleader, your own validator, your own biggest fan. The paradox here is that the freedom requires you to build new structures, internal ones. You're not abandoning structures altogether. You're creating ones that actually serve your growth. So how do we build these internal validation systems? First, learn to be comfortable with yourself. Spend time in silence. Learn to sit with your thoughts without immediately reaching for distraction. This isn't easy in our hyper-connected world, but it's essential. Learn to let go of visions and things that don't serve you anymore, to create space for things that do. This might mean releasing goals that were never really yours to begin with, once you adopted to please parents, partners, or society. Put yourself first, always. If there are days you feel slightly off, instead of pushing harder, do things that bring you joy. Journal, meditate, move your body, connect with nature, create something without judgment. Honor your emotions. Practice self-compassion. Speak to yourself as you would to a dear friend. Would you berate a friend for not having everything figured out? For making a mistake? For needing rest? Likely not. Extend the same kindness to yourself. Don't wait for the finish line to acknowledge your progress. Every step taken in alignment with your values deserves recognition. Surround yourself with people who see your worth independently of your achievements or status. Their presence can help remind you of your intrinsic value when you forget. How to deal with imposter syndrome on the path to freedom. There is no deadline, though we all want results as fast as possible. But when you do something you have never done before, you will feel like an imposter. And that's okay. You're not supposed to know how to do something before you start doing it, despite what we've been conditioned to believe. Give yourself time to adjust, to get used to everything. Remember that everyone, even the people who seem to have it all figured out, started as beginners. The difference is they were willing to feel uncomfortable while learning. Imposter syndrome often intensifies when you're doing something meaningful, something that matters to you. It's a sign that you are stretching beyond your comfort zone, which is exactly where growth happens. Document your journey, keep track of your progress, your insights, your growth. This creates evidence that counters the imposter narrative. Journal. Take a moment to reflect. What would you do differently if you truly believed in your own worth? Would you use your voice more boldly? Would you charge more for your services? Would you set stronger boundaries with people who drain you? Would you pursue the creative project you've been putting off? Sit with these questions. Write down what comes up and then consider what one small step you can take today that honors your worth. Because freedom without self-worth is just another form of prison. But freedom rooted in a solid sense of your inherent value, that's powerful. Now let's talk about support system, because the journey to freedom, despite all its solitary moments, isn't meant to be walked entirely alone. There is this persuasive myth we need to address first, the myth of the self-made individuals. We've all heard those stories. The entrepreneur who built an empire from nothing, the artist who succeeded against all odds, the self-taught expert who never really needed anyone's help. These narratives are powerful and they're everywhere, but they are also largely fiction. Most of these self-made individuals aren't nearly as self-made as they want us to believe. They create this picture of being entirely self-sufficient, but when you look closer, you often find that they started with capital, connections, or education that many don't have access to. They were raised with supportive systems, financial safety nets, or family resources you might never have had. It's ridiculous and honestly harmful to compare your journey to theirs without acknowledging the difference. And in today's world of carefully crafted social media narratives, it's getting harder to distinguish real stories from fabricated ones. I've learned to be skeptical of anyone selling me the pure self-made narrative. Everyone has received help in some form, whether they acknowledged it or not. The truly successful people I've met are usually quick to credit the other people who helped them along the way. So if we reject the myth of the entirely self-made individuals, how do we approach building networks that support our growth without creating unhealthy dependency? You absolutely need support while building your path to freedom, but at the same time you need to maintain enough independence that you don't just become someone else's vision of success. The people in your support network should ideally be your equals, not figures who constantly tell you what to do or how to be. This requires balancing connections with autonomy. You can't always rely on somebody else to make decisions for you or to validate every step you take. That's just trading one form of control for another. Look for reciprocal relationships where both give and receive, where you can be vulnerable but also stand in your power, when you can ask for help but also offer it. These balanced connections foster growth without creating dependency. The role of mentors, peers, and communities is huge here, but it comes with nuance. I used to rely on coaches and mentors way too much. They brought some positive things into my life, certainly, but with time I realized I had kind of lost my independence. I had a different vision for myself than they had for me, and it was incredibly hard to step up and start doing what I considered the right thing to do. There is this subtle power dynamic with formal mentors and coaches that can sometimes undermine your own intuition and vision if you're not careful. Finding people who are at a similar level, your peers, can often be much more beneficial, especially when you're just starting out, and it can save you thousands of dollars too. Peer relationships tend to be more equal, more collaborative. You're figuring things out together rather than one person positioning themselves as the expert of your life. There is room for mutual growth, for questioning, for exploration. Communities can be powerful too. Groups of people united by shared values or goals, but bringing diverse perspectives and skills. The key is finding communities that celebrate individuality within connection, not those that demand conformity for belonging. How do you maintain boundaries while nurturing these connections? And this is something I struggled with for years. When you get to know yourself better, it becomes easier to do this naturally. Remember that you don't have to implement every piece of advice you receive. You don't need to treat every suggestion as 100% truth, which I did in the past because I had zero self-faith and self-worth. I had such a hard time setting and maintaining healthy boundaries. Start by getting clear on your non-negotiables, what matters most to you, what values you won't compromise on, what types of treatment you won't accept. This becomes your guide points for boundary setting. Practice saying no without over-explaining. A simple "that doesn't work for me" is enough. You don't owe detailed justifications for your boundaries. Pay attention to how you feel after spending time with someone. Do you feel energized or drained, inspired or diminished? Your body often knows when a boundary has been crossed before your mind does. Be willing to outgrow connections that no longer serve your growth. This doesn't mean discarding people, but recognizing when relationships have fulfilled their purpose in your journey. And perhaps more importantly, model the behavior you want to receive. Respect others' boundaries. Don't try to make people dependent on you. Celebrate their wins without making them about you. The quality of connection you cultivate with others often reflects back to you. Building a sustainable support system isn't about finding perfect people. It's about creating connections that honor both your need for support and your right to define your own path. It's about finding the beautiful balance between independence and autonomy, because that's where true freedom flourishes. As we come to the end of this episode, I want to leave you with some thoughts about this journey we're on together. This quest for genuine freedom. Freedom isn't a destination we arrive at one day, stepping off a train into some perfect life where everything is exactly as we imagined. It's a practice, a daily commitment to living authentically, to making choices aligned with our deepest values rather than external expectations. This path isn't linear. There will be days when you feel completely liberated, when the choices you've made feel exactly right, and there will be days when you question everything, when the weight of responsibility feels too heavy, when you miss the comfort of having someone else make the decision. Both experiences are part of the journey. Both are valid. Both have something to teach you. Remember that the discomfort you feel when breaking free from old patterns isn't a sign you're doing something wrong. It's evidence of your own growth. The moments of doubt aren't weakness. They're opportunities to reaffirm your commitment to your own path. When we choose freedom, we're choosing to see ourselves clearly, our strengths and our limitations, our desires and our fears. We're choosing to take up space in the world as our full, authentic selves, not as diminished versions designed to please others and to fit into predefined boxes. This journey will transform you in ways you can't yet imagine. It will connect you with parts of yourself long forgotten, capabilities you never knew you had, and a resilience that will surprise you. It will also bring you into connection with others walking similar paths. Fellow travelers on this road less taken. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't need a perfect 5-year plan or absolute certainty about your destination. What you need is the courage to take the next step that feels right to you. The willingness to learn as you go. The compassion to be gentle with yourself when you stumble. The price of freedom isn't just what we pay to gain it. It's what we commit to every day to maintain it. It's the ongoing practice of choosing authenticity over approval, growth over comfort, truth over conformity. Is it easy? No. Is it worth it? Absolutely. Because once you've tasted true freedom, the kind that comes from within rather than from external circumstances, there is no going back. You realize that this is what you were born for, to live a life that is fully, uniquely, unapologetically yours. So I invite you to take a moment and acknowledge yourself for being on this path. Whether you're just beginning to question the status quo or you've been forging your own way for years, you're doing something brave and necessary. You're reclaiming your freedom, one choice at a time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Until the next time, bye!